Every ranger at Denali keeps a logbook. Not the official station record that belongs to the National Park Service, filed in triplicate, archived in Fairbanks. I mean the personal one, the field journal you carry in your chest pocket until the leather wears soft as cloth and the pages smell like spruce resin and sweat and the particular mineral tang of Alaskan mud. Mine is a Right in the Rain, number 371, bound in dark brown cover stock that turned almost black over the first 3 winters. I've filled 9 of them in 11 years. They live in a fireproof box under my bunk at the Alaskan substation, and every shift begins the same way. I uncap my pen, I log the date, the time, the temperature, the wind speed and direction, the cloud type and ceiling estimate, and any wildlife movement I can confirm along the Thoroughfare Ridge corridor. Then I note my planned patrol route, my expected return time, and my radio check-in schedule. This is not obsessive. This is how you stay alive in country that is indifferent to whether you do. I've been stationed at Denali for 11 years 8 as a GS-7 field ranger, 3 as a GS-9 patrol lead for the Toklat to Eelson corridor. In that time, my logbook has saved my life twice. The first time was a whiteout. In my second winter, I'd logged a compass bearing 40 minutes before visibility dropped to arm's length. And that bearing walked me back to the Igloo Creek shelter when my GPS lost satellite lock. The second time was something I'm not ready to talk about yet. That's why I'm here, actually. That's what this whole thing is about. But I need to do this in order, the way I'd write it in the logbook. Because without the context, without understanding the framework I was operating inside, none of what happened will make any sense. And the framework starts with the rules. Denali's backcountry protocol runs to about 300 pages if you print the NPS handbook, the Supplemental Wilderness Guidance, and the Bear Safety Addendum. Every seasonal hire reads it. Most of them retain about 40%, which is usually enough. But there's a second set of guidelines never printed, never emailed, never included in any official onboarding packet. You get them during orientation week, usually from a veteran ranger, usually over coffee in the Toklat rest station, usually delivered in a tone that implies the whole thing is a joke, a hazing ritual, a bit of park folklore to rattle the new seasonals. Everybody smiles. Nobody laughs. I got mine from a ranger named Dale Morrow, who is now my station supervisor. He recited them from memory without looking at me, staring out the window at the polychrome cliffs like he was reading them off the rock face. I memorized them the same day. Every veteran does. Here they are, exactly as I received them. 1. Do not answer a voice that calls your name from the tree line after last light. 2. If you see another ranger on the trail and they do not acknowledge your radio call, do not approach. Return to station and log the sighting. 3. If your reflection in still water moves before you do, close your eyes and count to 30. Do not look again until you reach 30. 4. If something in the wilderness offers to walk you home, decline. It will offer twice. Decline twice. It will not offer a third time. 5. If you find your own boot prints leading somewhere you have no memory of going, follow them only in daylight, only with your radio live, and only for a maximum of 1 mile. 6. If something looks like a person but does not cast a shadow at the right angle, do not engage. Walk at a normal pace in the opposite direction. Do not run. 7. If you are ever unsure whether the person standing in front of you is real, ask them the date. They will always get it wrong by exactly 1 day. I paused on Rule 7 the first time I heard it. I pause on it now. That last one is the one I keep coming back to. For my first 7 years at the park, I treated these rules the way most veterans do, as institutional mythology. Useful for bonding with new hires, mildly entertaining at end-of-season barbecues, and functionally irrelevant to the actual work of managing trails, monitoring wildlife, and keeping hikers from killing themselves through enthusiasm. I filed them in the same mental cabinet as ghost stories and tall tales about wolves the size of horses. Then came the autumn of my 8th year. Late September at Denali is what the Park Service calls shoulder season, the transitional weeks between the last summer tourists and the full winter closure. The buses stop running. The visitor centers scale back to skeleton hours. Most of the seasonal staff have already driven south to Anchorage or flown home to the lower 48. What remains is the park itself, enormous and largely unwatched. That particular September, our operational team for the Toklat to Alaskan corridor was 3 people. Myself, a junior ranger named Petra Okafor, who was midway through her 2nd season, and Dale Morrow, who technically supervised us from Healy, but was physically present at the station maybe 2 days a week. The rest of the time, it was Petra and me, and roughly 600,000 acres of wilderness. The tundra had already turned that deep amber and rust that photographs never quite capture, because the color isn't just visual, it's spatial. It changes the way the land holds light. The wind through the high passes had shifted to its autumn register, lower, more sustained, less variable. In summer, the wind gusts and plays. In September, it holds a single note for hours, like a breath drawn in and never released. The wildlife had begun its retreat. The caribou herds had moved west. The grizzlies were putting on their final weight along the salmon creeks further south. Even the ravens seemed quieter, more deliberate. The park felt, that September, like a theater after the audience has left, but before the actors have stopped performing. The first thing I noticed wasn't frightening. It wasn't dramatic. It was just wrong, in the way a slightly unlevel picture frame is wrong. You feel it in your peripheral awareness before your conscious mind can name what's bothering you. On my 3rd solo patrol of the shoulder season, I found the boot prints. They were in a muddy depression on the Thoroughfare Trail, about 2 miles east of the Toklat Rest Station, a section where snowmelt runoff keeps the ground soft well into October. A clear set of prints, maybe 20 in sequence, walking eastward toward a boulder field where the trail surface transitions from mud to exposed rock. The prints reached the boulder field and stopped. Not in the way prints stop when someone steps onto hard ground. There's usually a scuff mark, a partial impression, a logical termination point where soft substrate meets stone. These stopped mid-stride. The left boot was pressed deep at the toe, the heel barely touching. The kind of impression you leave when your weight is transferring forward into the next step. But there was no next step, no scuff on the nearest rock, no disturbed gravel, no indication of a jump, a turn, or a scramble. I photographed the prints per standard trail assessment protocol. I noted the tread pattern in my logbook. Danner, Arcadia. A lug sole I recognized immediately because it's the same boot I wear. Standard Ranger issue, common enough. The stride length I measured it with my hiking pole was within an inch of my own. I radioed Petra in her sector. She hadn't seen anyone on the trails. No hikers had checked in at the visitor center in 3 days. I logged the finding, categorized it as an anomalous track observation, and moved on with my patrol. But the image kept returning to me over the next 2 days, unprompted, involuntary. That pressed deep toe, that forward lean captured in mud. Someone mid-stride, mid-motion, mid-thought, and then simply not there anymore. Petra Okafor was the kind of ranger who made you feel like the wilderness was slightly less indifferent when she was in it. Late 20s, originally from Spokane, with a background in wildlife biology, and a laugh that carried across open tundra. She was in her second season at Denali, and already better at reading weather than people who'd been here a decade. She had a very loud presence, not volume exactly, but density. She filled every space she entered, every radio channel she spoke on, every shared meal with a kind of kinetic certainty that made silence feel like an anomaly around her. I liked her enormously. I mention the quality of her presence specifically because it will matter later. 3 days after the boot prints, we shared a field meal at the Toklat rest station, instant coffee from a thermos, energy bars. The kind of lunch you eat with gloves on, because stopping too long in late September means cold hands for an hour afterward. I mentioned the prints, almost as a curiosity. Petra wasn't concerned. Weird tracks happen. Animals step in existing prints. Mud does strange things when it freezes and thaws in alternating cycles. But then she mentioned something else, almost as an aside, the way you mention a mildly interesting bird sighting. For the past 3 nights, around 2 in the morning, her radio had been picking up a frequency that wasn't assigned to any Denali channel. It wasn't static. It was rhythmic, structured, repeating. She'd recorded it on her phone. She played it for me across the table, the speaker tinny and small against the wind. It sounded like someone breathing in Morse code. Inhale, exhale, inhale, but patterned, grouped, as if the breathing itself was encoding something. Neither of us could decode it. We agreed to report it to Dale in the morning. By morning, it felt too small to mention, too strange to explain without sounding foolish. So we didn't. Looking back, that was my first mistake. That night, back at my substation bunk, I did something I couldn't quite explain to myself at the time. I pulled the older logbooks from the storage shelf, the ones left by previous rangers assigned to this sector, and searched for any mention of unassigned radio frequencies. I found one entry, dated 18 months before my arrival at the park, written in a tight, precise hand I recognized from dozens of other entries across 5 logbooks. Torrance Wells, 7 seasons at Denali. Patrol lead for the same corridor I now managed. His entry was 3 sentences long. Unassigned frequency, active, again on portable unit. 0200 to 0215, approximately. Rhythmic audio pattern, non-voice, non-static. Do not respond. Do not respond. Not could not identify or reported to maintenance. Do not respond. An instruction. a warning written to himself or to whoever read the logbook next. I knew Torrance Wells only by reputation and by the evidence of his logbooks. He completed 7 seasons, an unusually long tenure for a field ranger in a park this demanding, and then submitted a 2-week notice without explanation. No exit interview on file, no forwarding address. He left the season before I arrived, and nobody I asked about him ever had more than a shrug to offer. His logbook entries across those 7 years were meticulous, professional, almost beautiful in their precision. But in the final months, they grew sparse, single sentences, and his very last entry, written 3 days before he gave notice, read simply, "Confirmed. It does not know the date." I had read that entry before, years earlier, and assumed it was a mental health incident. The park has a documented history of isolation psychosis. Rangers who stay too long sometimes start writing things that don't connect to observable reality. Now, sitting with that sentence in the context of the radio frequency and the boot prints, it sat differently in my chest. Torrance hadn't lost his mind. He'd tested Rule 7 and confirmed it worked. The next morning, Petra was 37 minutes late to our designated trail checkpoint. I radioed her at the scheduled time. No response. I waited 6 minutes and tried again. Nothing. 6 more minutes. Nothing. On the 4th attempt, 18 minutes after her expected arrival, she answered slightly breathless, apologetic, embarrassed. She'd overslept. Her alarm hadn't gone off. She was fine, completely fine. She'd be at the checkpoint in 20 minutes. She was. She arrived at a light jog, cheeks flushed, waving, already talking before she was within comfortable speaking distance. She looked normal. She acted normal. She was very loud, the way she always was. And for the first time, her loudness felt slightly performed, like someone who knows they are supposed to be loud and is being loud in all the correct ways, with all the correct energy, but assembling the performance from components rather than generating it from within. I wrote this off immediately. Paranoia, sleep deprivation, the residue of too many hours thinking about boot prints and radio frequencies and a dead man's logbook. I did not write it in my logbook. I changed the subject. We completed our patrol. Everything returned to normal for 4 days. 4 completely uneventful, ordinary, beautiful autumn days. And it was precisely that normalcy, that stretch of peace I let myself believe in, that made what came next so much harder to process. I want to be honest about what those 4 days felt like, because it matters. They were good days, perhaps the best of that season. The weather held clear so cold mornings, the kind that turn your breath into brief, perfect clouds, but warming by midday into something you could almost call pleasant. I completed my patrols with the steady satisfaction of a job done well. I logged 2 grizzly sightings along the upper Toklat, both at safe distance, both behaving normally. I watched the Alaska Range catch the last hour of September, light. In that way, it does the peaks, turning first gold, then rose, then a purple so deep it looks like the mountains are holding their breath before nightfall. I was happy. I need you to understand that. I was happy in the particular way I am only happy here, a happiness built from solitude, from purpose, from the knowledge that I am exactly where I am supposed to be, doing exactly what I was trained to do. This park is the only place I have ever felt that certainty. I mention this because I think the thing in the park knew it. I think it knew what I had to lose. On the 5th day, I was walking the Toklat River Corridor Trail, a long, straight stretch that follows the braided riverbed with clear sightlines in both directions for nearly a kilometer. I was alone. My schedule confirmed I was alone. Petra was in her sector, 3 miles south. Dale was in Healy. 400 meters ahead of me, there was a ranger on the trail. I stopped walking. I assessed. The figure was wearing standard Denali issue uniform, the correct gray-green jacket, the correct campaign hat, the correct posture of someone who has been walking in hiking boots for years. The gait was unhurried, professional. Everything about the silhouette said, colleague. I keyed my radio. Toklat Corridor. This is Vess. I have visual on a uniformed individual approximately 400 meters east of my position. Please identify. No response. I switched to the emergency channel. All stations. This is Vess on emergency. Uniformed individual on Toklat Corridor. Not responding to standard hail. Request identification. Nothing. Not even static. The channel was simply empty. Rule 2 activated in my mind with a clarity that surprised me, not as folklore, not as a joke, but as a procedure. A protocol I suddenly, viscerally understood I was required to follow. Return to station. Log the sighting. Do not approach. I began to turn, and the figure turned too. Not turned around, turned its head, just the head, rotating toward me across 400 meters of open tundra. And even at that distance, even at a range where facial features should have been indistinguishable, I could see the face. The face was the right shape, the right coloring for sun-weathered skin. The proportions of eyes, nose, mouth were all anatomically correct. But the expression was wrong in a way I cannot fully articulate even now. Every muscle seemed to be positioned where a human expression would place it, but the sequencing was off. Like someone had arranged the components of a neutral expression from a diagram rather than from the inside. I turned around. I walked back toward station. I did not run. Rule 2 does not say to run. I maintained a normal pace for 1 mile, then another, then a third. I did not look behind me. It was one of the most difficult things I have ever done. I reached station. I logged the sighting in both the official record and my personal logbook. I called Dale. He was unavailable. Cell coverage in the Healy corridor is unreliable, and his voicemail picked up on the first ring. I left a message that was calm, professional, and completely inadequate to what I had just experienced. Then I sat at my desk with a cup of coffee that went cold in my hands, and I did what 11 years of fieldwork had trained me to do. I observed the pattern. I built a profile. The entity, I will not call it anything more specific, because specificity implies understanding. I do not have appeared to be mimetic. It replicated human appearance with high fidelity, but imperfect execution. It adopted the visual markers of a park ranger, which suggested it had been observing rangers specifically, possibly for an extended period. It did not respond to radio communication. This was not, I realized, a simple failure to hear the transmission. It was a failure to understand the social function of the technology, the implicit contract that says when someone calls you on a shared frequency, you acknowledge. It had the uniform right. It had the gait right. But it did not understand that the radio is not decorative. It got the date wrong by exactly 1 day. Not by a week. Not randomly. 1 day. Consistently. This implied an understanding of calendrical time that was close, but not native, like someone converting between time zones in their head, and always rounding in the same direction. It did not cast shadows correctly. Its reflection in still water moved independently. Its facial expressions were assembled rather than generated. Each rule, I realized, was not a superstition. Each rule was a diagnostic test, a specific behavioral assay designed to identify a single failure mode in a mimicry system that was otherwise nearly perfect. The rules were a field guide to the entity's limitations, written in the only language that mattered out here: procedure. They were a series of tests written by people who survived long enough to identify the failure modes. This meant multiple people had encountered this thing. It meant the rules had been refined across encounters, across generations of rangers, possibly. It meant some of those rangers had survived to write their observations down. And it meant some had not. I thought of Torrance Wells, 7 seasons. Confirmed. It does not know the date. And then gone. The next rational step was clear, and it made me feel physically ill. I found Petra at the Toklat rest station at midday. She was already there when I arrived, sitting on the bench outside with her thermos, face tilted toward what remained of the September sun. She smiled when she saw me. It was a good smile, warm, familiar. We talked. End of season plans. She was thinking of driving to Anchorage for a few days before flying home. There was a restaurant on 4th Avenue she'd been wanting to try since last summer. I asked about her family. She told a story about her sister's new dog that was genuinely funny. I laughed. And then, with a casualness I had rehearsed in my head for the entire walk over, I mentioned that I needed to file a supply request before the month's end. "Do you know what date it is today?" I asked. I've completely lost track. She looked at her watch. Not her phone, her watch. This detail registered with a precision I wished it hadn't. She told me the date. She was exactly 1 day off. I said, "Of course, thank you," and changed the subject to trail conditions in her sector. The next 15 minutes were the longest of my professional life. I kept my voice steady. I asked follow-up questions at appropriate intervals. I offered her the last of my coffee. I said goodbye at the normal time, at the normal volume, with the normal wave. I walked back to my sector at a normal pace. And once I was genuinely, completely out of sight behind a ridge, around a bend, in a depression where no angle of observation could reach me, I sat down on the cold tundra and put my head in my hands for a very long time. I tried Dale again from the substation landline. Voicemail. I tried his personal cell. Voicemail. I tried the Healy Ranger Station administrative line. An automated message informed me the office was closed for the day. I sat with the phone in my hand and rehearsed the call I would make to the NPS regional office in Anchorage. I imagined the conversation. I imagined saying the words out loud. I believe something is impersonating my colleague. I imagined the pause on the other end. The careful, professional tone they would use to ask follow-up questions. The wellness check they would initiate on me, not on the thing wearing Petra's face. I could not make that call. I considered the possibility that I was wrong. I built the counter-argument with the same rigor I'd used to build the profile. People get the date wrong. It's late September in the Alaskan backcountry. There are no calendar markers, no appointments, no reason to track days with precision. Her watch might display the date incorrectly. She might have misspoken. The probability of an innocent explanation was not zero. I held this counter-argument in my mind and examined it honestly. And then I remembered the way her loudness had felt assembled on that morning she was 37 minutes late. I remembered the radio frequency breathing in structured patterns at 2 a.m. I remembered boot prints in my tread pattern, stopping mid-stride in soft mud. I remembered a face 400 meters away with its muscles in the right positions, but the wrong sequence. The counter-argument collapsed. Not dramatically, not with a revelation. It just became untenable under the accumulated weight of everything I had observed. I was not wrong. I did not have the luxury of being wrong. That evening, I completed my final perimeter check before logging off for the night. The sun was already below the ridgeline, the sky holding that deep indigo that precedes full dark at this latitude in late September. I had my headlamp on, but not activated. There was still enough ambient light to navigate the trail. I came around the eastern boundary of my patrol sector, where the trail curved south toward the Toklat drainage, and she was there, standing very still at the edge of the trail, facing me. Not walking, not approaching, just present, in the way a signpost is present, an object placed in a specific location for a specific purpose. It was wearing Petra's face, Petra's jacket, Petra's posture. But it was standing with a stillness that Petra, the real Petra, the loud Petra, the Petra who was constitutionally incapable of being still, would never have achieved. It spoke. "It's getting dark early. I'll walk back with you." The words were correct. The tone was correct. The cadence was almost correct. And my body flooded with adrenaline, so complete that my vision sharpened, and my hearing seemed to expand outward in all directions simultaneously. 11 years of professional training. 11 years of maintaining calm in the presence of charging grizzlies, sudden whiteouts, injured hikers, and my own accumulated fear. All of it condensed into a single moment of absolute, deliberate control. I kept my voice level. I kept my breathing even. I said, "I appreciate the offer, but I'm fine. Go ahead." The thing looked at me. It looked at me for a duration I registered as 4 seconds, but experienced as significantly longer. Its expression did not change, not in the way a human expression doesn't change, through micro-adjustments and subtle shifts, but in a total, mechanical way. Fixed. Then it said, with a slight shift in cadence, the verbal equivalent of a mask slipping a single millimeter to the left. "Are you sure? It's a long walk." The second offer. "I'm sure," I said, same tone, same volume, same register. "I'll see you tomorrow." It nodded. The nod was technically correct. It turned. The turn was technically correct. It walked away along the trail with a gait that was technically correct. I watched it until it rounded the bend. I watched the empty trail for 60 seconds after that. Rule 4. It will not offer a third time. I did not know, standing there in the growing dark, whether "will not offer a third time" meant it would stop trying, or whether it meant it would stop asking. I returned to station. In the official log, I wrote, "Uneventful patrol, wildlife inactive." In my personal logbook, beneath the ruled line that separates professional observation from private notation, I wrote 3 words. Rule 4, confirmed. At 11:47 p.m., I logged the exact time my radio activated, not on any assigned channel, on the frequency Petra had first recorded weeks ago, the one that sounded like structured breathing. But it wasn't breathing anymore. It was a voice, Petra's voice, saying my name. Callum. Pause. Callum. Pause. Callum. The same inflection each time, the same duration of pause, same placement of stress on the second syllable. Not a recording in the technical sense. There was no loop artifact, no click of a restart, but repeating with a perfection that no human voice maintains across repetitions. We drift. We vary. We are incapable of true repetition. This did not drift. I listened for 43 seconds. I counted them against my watch. The voice did not change, did not escalate, did not add words. Just my name, patient and flat, like someone calling a dog they know will eventually come. I reached for the radio's power switch. Before my fingers made contact, the voice stopped. Mid-syllable, not fading, severed. 3 seconds of absolute silence. Not radio silence, actual silence. The wind outside my window stopped. The ambient hum of the substation's heating element, which I had long since stopped consciously hearing, was absent. 3 seconds of nothing. Then a different voice came through, lower, rougher, without any cadence I could identify as human speech rhythm. It said a single sentence. You walked the right direction. The frequency cleared. Background static returned. The wind resumed outside. The heating element hummed. I sat with the radio in my hand for a long time. The coffee on my desk was cold. The logbook was open. The overhead light buzzed at its normal frequency. And I understood, with a clarity that felt like a physical weight settling onto my chest, why this moment was worse than all the others. Worse than the boot prints. Worse than the face on the Toklat Trail. Worse than Petra getting the date wrong. The voice on the radio had acknowledged that I followed Rule 2 correctly. It had evaluated my performance, my adherence to protocol, and communicated approval. It had been watching closely enough to grade me. The rules were not a secret I possessed. They were a shared language. I did not sleep that night. I lay in my bunk with the light on, and the logbook open on my chest, and I worked through the implication of what the radio had told me. The rules only function as diagnostic tests if the entity fails them consistently. If it could pass Rule 7, if it could learn the correct date, the rule would become useless. Every rule in the protocol depended on the entity exhibiting a predictable limitation. But the radio communication demonstrated something that reframed the entire system. The entity knew the rules existed. It knew I was following them. It responded to my compliance with what could only be interpreted as positive feedback, which meant one of two things. Either the entity was incapable of correcting its limitations, it structurally could not learn the date, could not fix its shadow, could not operate a radio, or it had not yet chosen to. If the first was true, the rules were a genuine shield. If the second was true, they were a leash with a very long lead. I lay there and followed the second possibility to its conclusion. If the mimic was choosing to maintain its failure modes, choosing to remain testable, identifiable, diagnosable, then the entire protocol was not a defense system. It was an agreement, a set of behavioral parameters both parties recognized and operated within. The rules had not protected past rangers because they were cleverer than the entity. The rules had protected them because the entity found rule-following subjects more useful than dead ones. We were not survivors. We were, and always had been, research subjects in a study we didn't design and couldn't exit. The survival rate wasn't ours. It was its. I wrote this in my personal logbook in full, clear sentences. I noted it was possibly the most frightening thing I had ever committed to paper. Then I closed the logbook, placed it under my pillow, and waited for morning with my eyes open. Morning came. And what happened in the morning is something I have never told anyone. Not in the official incident report, not in any debrief, not in any conversation. I'm telling it now because there's something you need to understand before I reach the end. The morning light was thin and silver, overcast, but bright. The kind of diffused illumination that erases shadows and makes distances difficult to judge. I took my patrol route along the upper thoroughfare corridor with my radio live, my logbook in my chest pocket, my pace normal and even. I was performing normalcy. I was aware I was performing it. I did not know for certain whether anyone was watching the performance, but I conducted myself as though someone was. This had become, I realized, my default state. At the high point of the trail, a natural overlook where the ridge drops away, and you can see the full sweep of the valley below. All the way to the braided channels of the Toklat, I stopped. Not because I chose to, because something was wrong with the valley. Not dramatically wrong, not Hollywood wrong. Wrong in a way that took me several seconds to identify. The way a very slightly out-of-tune instrument takes time to register against a correctly tuned one. The tundra colors were right. The mountain silhouettes were right. The river channels were where they belonged. But the shadows were moving in the wrong direction. Not wildly, not impossibly. Off by perhaps 5 degrees from where the morning light, overcast, diffused, coming from the east-southeast, should have placed them. The shadows were behaving as though the light source was shifted slightly north of its actual position. As if someone had rebuilt this valley from memory and gotten almost everything right, except for a single detail of solar geometry that they'd estimated rather than calculated. I stood there for a long time, watching the shadows track along their slightly incorrect vectors. And slowly, with the same incremental certainty with which your eyes adjust to darkness, I understood what I was seeing. I was not looking at the valley as it was. I was looking at the valley as something else perceived it. I was inside the mimic's working model, its internal representation of this landscape projected outward, overlaid onto the real one, like accidentally seeing a theater set from behind the scrim, like glimpsing the rough draft beneath the final painting. The sensation was not horrifying. It was incomprehensibly lonely, like looking at a painting of a place you love, made by someone who has never been there, but has spent years studying photographs. Every detail rendered with care, and every detail, in some fundamental way, a degree removed from the truth. I walked on. I kept my pace even. I did not write the shadow observation in the official logbook. I wrote it in the personal one, in the margin, in small letters, as if making it smaller would make it less true. And as I walked, the regret arrived. Not all at once, but in a cascade, each realization triggering the next. Like dominoes, I had been setting up for weeks without seeing the line they formed. I should have reported the radio frequency the morning after Petra first played it for me. I should have insisted. I should have called Anchorage that day and accepted looking foolish. I should have logged the face of the Toklat Trail entity in enough detail for someone else to cross-reference. I should have pushed harder to reach Dale, driven to Healy myself, forced the conversation. I should have done these things because they were the correct professional response to an escalating anomaly. And I did not do them. And I knew why I didn't. I knew with an honesty that hurt more than the fear. I didn't report because reporting would have made it real. Reporting would have meant admitting that the rules were not folklore, that they were active protocol. And if they were active protocol, then everything about my decade in this park, every quiet patrol, every peaceful overlook, every morning I stood alone on a ridge and felt that particular solitary happiness, all of it was shadowed by the presence of something I had been sharing the wilderness with, something close enough to study my boot prints, close enough to learn my stride length. It's not that I was afraid of the thing. I was afraid of how much of my life I'd spent standing next to it without knowing. 11 years. 11 years of feeling alone in a landscape I loved. And perhaps I had never once been alone. The regret was not about danger avoided. It was about intimacy I hadn't consented to. The horrifying possibility that what I experienced as solitude, as the defining quality of my life here, was actually a long, patient observation session. And I was the specimen who mistook the lab for a home. I found her at 10:47 a.m., the real Petra Okafor. She was in an unmaintained shelter cabin, roughly 2.3 miles off her assigned trail, a small, weathered structure used only for emergency weather refuge, not mapped on any standard patrol route. I found her because I wasn't looking for her the way the rules suggested. I was looking for her the way a ranger looks for a missing person, systematically, following terrain logic and shelter probability, rather than trail markers. She was physically unharmed. Sitting on the cabin's single wooden bench, with her knees drawn up and her hands wrapped around her empty thermos, as if it were still warm. She looked up when I opened the door, and the expression on her face was not fear. It was confusion, deep, disoriented confusion, the kind that comes from losing time in a way your brain cannot reconcile. She didn't know how long she'd been there. She thought it might have been one night. Her logbook showed entries for the past 3 days, patrol observations, weather notes, wildlife sightings, all in her handwriting. But the handwriting was fractionally different. Not obviously, not in a way that anyone else would notice. But I had been reading Petra's logbook entries for 2 seasons. The letter spacing was slightly more even than her natural hand. The pressure was slightly more consistent, as if someone had practiced her script and achieved technical accuracy without the small, human inconsistencies of authentic writing. Her phone was dead. Her radio was functional, but broadcasting steady static on all channels. She said it had been doing that since she arrived. I asked her, very carefully, keeping my voice light and casual, what day she thought it was. She said today's correct date, without hesitation, without checking her watch. The relief was physical. The exact sensation of setting down something very heavy that you've been carrying so long you forgot you were holding it. I did not tell her what had been wearing her face. I did not tell her about the radio, the offer to walk me home, the structured breathing on the unassigned frequency. I helped her pack her kit, checked her vitals, offered her water and food, and walked her out to the main trail at a steady, normal pace. I did not look behind us. That night, after Petra was safely back at her substation, I confirmed this by radio, and her voice on the channel was hers, genuinely hers. In a way I could feel in my chest, I did something I cannot fully explain as a rational decision. I went to the Stillwater observation point on the Thorofare, a small tarn, perhaps 30 meters across, that rangers use as a barometric weather gauge. The color of the water indicates certain pressure conditions. It's a standard checkpoint. I told myself I was checking the water color. I knew why I had really come. I stood at the edge of the tarn and looked at my reflection. The water was still, perfectly still. No wind, no current, no disturbance. My reflection was crisp and clear in the last ambient light of the evening. I watched it. I watched it the way you watch a closed door after hearing a sound you can't identify, with total attention and zero expectation. My reflection blinked. I had not blinked. My eyes were open, and my reflection blinked both lids, closing and opening, in a natural, casual way. Then it blinked again. 2 blinks, 1 beat, after I finally, involuntarily blinked in response. I closed my eyes. I counted to 30. I did not rush. I did not falter. Each number steady and even and deliberate. At 30, I opened my eyes. The water was still. My reflection was correct. Perfectly synchronized. Perfectly ordinary. I stood there for a while longer, watching the tarn, watching myself, watching the tarn. And I said quietly, to no one, and perhaps to something, I don't know if Rule 3 fixed something, or if it was finished doing what it came to do. The water held my reflection perfectly. The wind stayed absent. I walked back to station in the dark, the last patrol of the shoulder season. I documented it with more care than any patrol I have ever conducted, as if I knew, on some level beneath conscious thought, that these notes would matter, that I would need to return to them later and find them precise. The morning was clear. Temperature at 0630, 28 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind from the northwest at 4 miles per hour. Visibility unlimited. The frost had hardened the trail surface overnight, and my footsteps produced a clean, regular crunch that I could hear precisely against the ambient silence. No birds, no wind variation. The park was holding still. I moved through the landscape with a different quality of attention than I had ever brought to a patrol before. Not hypervigilance, something more complex. A kind of total receptivity. as if every shadow, every peripheral movement, every half-heard sound was potentially authored. Not random, not natural, placed there with intention by something that understood how I would process it. This awareness was both exhausting and clarifying, like developing a new sense. I passed the boulder field where the boot prints had been. I stopped. I looked at the soft ground beside the rocks, where weeks ago a single left foot had pressed deep mid-stride and then ceased to exist. There were no new prints in that original location. But beside the termination point, beside that pressed deep toe, there was a single fresh impression. A right foot, facing away from the boulder field, facing back toward the trail. Something had come back. I stood over the return print for a long time. Then I assessed the conditions against Rule 5. Daylight, confirmed. Radio, live, confirmed. 1 mile maximum. I oriented myself along the direction the print was facing, back toward the main trail, eastward, towards the high overlooks, and I walked. The trail was one I had walked hundreds of times. Every rise, every bend, every exposed root system mapped in my muscle memory. I walked it now with a strange dual awareness, the familiar terrain, and the knowledge that I was following an invitation. Something had placed that print as precisely as a written note. Come this way. I'll be here. The trail climbed, the tundra opened, and ahead, where the ridge terminates at a wide granite shelf overlooking the full sweep of the Alaska Range, I saw it. Not in Petra's form, not in ranger uniform, not in any human shape I had ever encountered or imagined. I need to be precise here, and precision fails me in a way it never has before. I am a man who has spent his professional life observing and documenting. I have described grizzly behavior at 400 meters. I have logged cloud formations that most people would lack the vocabulary to differentiate. Language is my primary tool in this wilderness. And looking at the thing on the granite shelf, my primary tool was inadequate. It was the right size for a person. That is the closest I can come to a physical description. It occupied roughly the volume a person would occupy. But the distribution was wrong. Not grotesquely, not in a way that triggered revulsion, but in a way that triggered scale. The same cognitive sensation you experience looking at the Alaska Range itself, the understanding that you are perceiving something that does not require your comprehension in order to continue existing. Something that exists at a magnitude your nervous system was not designed to process. It was standing on the granite shelf, facing the mountains, not facing me. I stopped 30 meters away. I did not speak. I do not know what I would have said. It stood there. I stood there. The mountains filled the horizon. The morning light was clear and gold and honest, and the Alaska Range was doing what it does on clear mornings, being so large and so present that it makes everything else feel provisional. After some time, I estimated 4 minutes, but I will note for the record that my sense of time was unreliable. The thing turned its head. Not its body, its head, in a motion that was not quite rotation, to an angle from which I could perceive its awareness of me. And then it did something I have no rule for. It gestured toward the mountains, not a beckoning gesture, not a threat, a presenting gesture. An open hand, or something that functioned as an open hand indicating the view. The way a museum docent indicates a painting. The way you point out a sunset to someone standing next to you. "Look at this," the gesture said. "Isn't this something?" I stayed. I want to be clear about this because it is the center of everything. No rule told me to stay. No rule told me to leave. I was in territory no protocol covered. I made a choice that was entirely my own. And I stayed. I walked slowly, at a pace I can only describe as respectful, to a point approximately 10 meters from the thing. I stopped. I turned to face the mountains. And I stood there. 11 minutes. I know this because when I finally looked at my watch afterward, 11 minutes had elapsed since my last logged trail checkpoint. In those 11 minutes, I did not speak. The thing did not speak. We occupied the same granite shelf, and we watched the same mountains in the same morning light. And I will spend the rest of my professional life trying to articulate what those 11 minutes contained. Here is what I thought about, standing there. I thought about what it means to observe something so closely, for so long, with such patience, to catalog every gesture and every stride length and every radio frequency and every facial micro-expression, and to still not be the thing you're observing, to replicate everything and comprehend nothing, to get the date wrong, to get the shadows wrong by 5 degrees, to build a perfect copy of a valley from photographs you've stared at for years and still miss the angle of the sun. I thought about what kind of loneliness that implies. And then I corrected myself. I'm doing what humans do. I'm assuming its interiority maps onto mine. I have absolutely no evidence of that. I'm standing next to something that may have no interior at all, no experience, no loneliness, no aesthetic response to the mountains it appears to be watching. I'm projecting. I'm anthropomorphizing. I'm doing the exact thing my species does, compulsively, reflexively, helplessly. I'm finding a face in the static. And then I thought, and this is the thought I cannot escape. What if that impulse is exactly what it's studying? Not the rules, not the patrol routes, not the radio frequencies, or the boot treads, or the shadow angles. But the thing underneath all of those, the human drive to relate, to find the familiar in the unfamiliar, to stand next to something incomprehensible and immediately begin constructing a narrative in which it has feelings. What if that's the interesting part? What if that's what it keeps coming back to observe? The 11 minutes ended without a signal. I did not see it leave. I became aware, gradually, that the space beside me was empty, that the shelf held only me and the view and the cold morning air. I looked over, confirming what I already felt. The granite was bare. I was alone with the Alaska Range in all its indifferent enormity. I stood there a while longer. Then I walked back to station, my final personal logbook entry for that shoulder season. I wrote it at my desk that evening, with a cup of coffee that I actually drank while it was still warm, which felt, somehow, like a small victory. I quote it in full because I have never shared it before, and because it is the truest thing I have ever written. I stood next to it today, both of us looking at the same thing. I don't know what it saw. I don't know what I saw. I know I've been here 11 years. I know the rules by heart. I know every trail in this sector. And I stood there for 11 minutes and could not determine whether I was the observer or the observed. Torrance Wells wrote confirmed and walked away from this place forever. I understand the impulse. I'll be back in spring. I don't fully know why. I think it's the same reason the thing on the shelf was watching the mountains. Some things you just keep coming back to. I closed the logbook. I placed it in the fireproof box. I locked the box. I completed my station close down checklist, water off, heat to minimum, shutters latched, official logbook sealed and labeled for archive pickup. I loaded my truck. I drove out of the park on the single road that connects Denali's interior to the world outside. I did not look in the rearview mirror. Not because I was afraid of what I would see, but because some things deserve to be left in the place where they live. Some things you don't carry out with you. You leave them where they belong, and you drive toward the lights of the highway, and you rejoin the human world, and you carry only what your logbook holds. I came back in April. I always come back. The park in spring is a different animal from the park in autumn. The snow retreats up the mountainsides in visible increments, a few feet each day, exposing ground that hasn't seen sun in 6 months. The first green comes not as a color, but as a feeling, a softening of the landscape's edges. The creeks run high and loud with meltwater. The visitor center begins its slow reactivation. Seasonal staff arriving, orientation sessions beginning again, the first buses being serviced in the maintenance yard. I was assigned the same patrol sector, Toklat to Eelson. I noted this in my logbook without commentary. It was neither a surprise nor a relief. It simply was. Petra was back too. She'd requested a transfer to the Wonder Lake sector further west, a different corridor entirely. She made the request quietly during the off-season, through official channels, without explanation. When I saw her at the spring all-staff meeting, she smiled at me the same way she always had. We didn't discuss September. We didn't need to. Some things communicate themselves through the choices people make afterward. Dale Morrow was still station supervisor, still commuting from Healy, still mostly absent, mostly available by phone, mostly reliable, in the specific way that institutional authority is reliable, present when everything is fine, unreachable when it isn't. On my first patrol of the new season, I walked the thoroughfare corridor in morning light that felt new and ancient at the same time. I passed the boulder field. I stopped and looked at the ground where the prints had been, where one foot had pressed deep mid-stride and the other had faced back toward the trail. The ground was fresh, clean, unwritten. Winter had erased everything. I stood there for a moment, feeling the absence of the evidence, like a phantom weight. Then I kept walking. 6 weeks of spring passed without incident. Normal patrols, normal weather, normal wildlife activity, the caribou returning to their summer range, the first grizzlies emerging from their dens, the ravens rebuilding their territorial calls after the winter's quiet. I logged everything with my usual precision. I slept well. I drank my coffee hot. On a clear morning in late May, I reached the granite shelf, overlook my favorite spot on the entire patrol route, the wide, flat stone that faces the Alaska range, the place where I had stood for 11 minutes in September, beside something I could not name. There was something on the shelf, a stone, dark, smooth, roughly the size of a fist, river polished. I recognized the geology immediately. Toklat riverbed basalt, the specific blue-black variety that only occurs in the lower reaches, miles below this elevation. It was not native to this shelf. No natural process could have placed it here. No water reaches this high. No animal carries stones and deposits them on granite overlooks with this kind of precision. Because it was placed with precision. Set at the shelf's eastern edge, oriented so that its flattest face caught the morning light and reflected a small, clean point of brightness across the surrounding granite. A deliberate angle, an intentional relationship between stone and sun. It looked exactly like something someone had put there because they found it beautiful in that spot. I crouched beside it. I looked at it for a long time, the way you look at a sentence in a language you don't speak, but suspect says something important. I did not touch it. I did not move it. I photographed it with my field camera and logged the photograph with a note. Placed object, non-native stone, Toklat riverbed geology. Orientation appears intentional. No human foot traffic recorded in this sector for 72 hours. I stood up. I looked at the mountains. I looked at the stone. The point of reflected light it cast was steady and clean in the morning sun. A tiny star on dark granite, placed there by something that understood how the light would fall at this hour, in this season, at this precise angle. I've been trying to decide for a very long time whether that stone was an offering, or a marker, or a message, or something else entirely. Something for which I don't have a word, because I'm the wrong kind of mind to have invented it. What I know is that whoever, whatever, carried that stone up here from the riverbed and placed it in that light, in that spot, did so with care. And in 11 years in this wilderness, there is nothing I have ever seen that I can say with complete certainty is more or less than that. I'm sharing this story now because I believe people who go into wild places deserve to know what the rules are. Not because the rules will necessarily protect you. I'm no longer certain protection is their primary function, but because, in my experience, they establish a kind of mutual grammar, a protocol both parties recognize, and in a wilderness where everything else is uncertain. A shared grammar is not nothing. Do not answer a voice that calls your name after dark. Do not approach what won't acknowledge you. If your reflection moves wrong, close your eyes and count. If something offers to walk you home, decline and decline again, and trust that the third time will not come. Follow your own lost tracks only in daylight, only with your radio live, only for a mile. Do not engage what casts no proper shadow. And if you are unsure whether the person before you is real, ask them the date. I recite these now, not with the clinical flatness of a safety briefing, but in the register they deserve, which is something closer to acknowledgement. These rules were written by people who paid for them, people who stood where I stood and saw what I saw, and chose to leave something useful behind for whoever came next. That is not nothing either. 12 years I've been in this park now. 12 years of logbooks in a fireproof box. 12 years of the same trails, the same overlooks, the same ritual of uncapping a pen at the start of every shift and writing down what is true. What I've learned in 12 years is this. The wilderness is not hostile. It is not benevolent. It is attentive. It watches with a patience and a precision that I cannot match and do not fully understand. And it has been watching for longer than my logbook's record. The correct response to something attentive is not fear. It is not friendliness. It is the same quality you bring to the logbook, to the rules, to the long cold patrols and the sleepless midnights and the granite shelf in the morning light. I call this quality honest witness. It means writing down what you see without embellishment or denial. It means standing where you are and looking at what is in front of you and recording it faithfully, especially when what is in front of you does not conform to anything you were trained to expect. Honest witness is the only thing I have to offer. And perhaps it is the only thing that was ever being asked of me. I'll be back in the fall. I always am.